After an 11-hour flight from Seattle to Pennsylvania, I dragged my suitcase up the familiar driveway, exhausted, but excited to see my family for the first time in 2 years. Mom Susan opened the front door with no smile, no greeting, no hug. Just cold eyes and a demand that made my blood freeze. "You will babysit your brother Derek's 3 kids while we all go on our planned Bahamas vacation." Derek laughed from behind her, telling his children not to wipe their snot on me. Everyone found this hilarious. I smiled calmly and said quietly, "I have been recording everything since I walked up the driveway." Mom went pale, whispering, "No, no, no way." 3 months earlier, my phone had started ringing every other day. Mom's voice would crack with emotion as she begged me to come home for Christmas. She painted pictures of family traditions I needed to be part of, memories we had to create together. How much everyone missed me terribly. The calls always ended with her sniffling about how the holidays would not be the same without her youngest son. I was living in a cramped studio apartment in Seattle, working as a software developer for a small tech startup. My days started before sunrise coding, until my eyes burned, then transitioning to my evening job delivering food just to make rent. Every dollar mattered when you were barely scraping by in one of the most expensive cities in America. But hearing the desperation in Mom's voice melted my practical concerns about money. The flight alone would cost me $800 I did not have. I maxed out my credit card and took unpaid time off work, knowing I would struggle financially for months to recover. But family was family right. The guilt in Mom's voice when she talked about Christmas morning without me there convinced me that flying home was the right thing to do. Derek had moved back into our childhood home after his divorce, bringing his 3 young children with him. Mom claimed the house felt empty, despite having 4 extra people living there. She needed her baby boy home to make the holidays complete, she said. Every conversation reinforced how much they all desperately wanted me there. The flight was brutal. Delayed takeoff crying babies, turbulence that left my stomach churning. I spent those 11 hours imagining warm hugs, catching up on 2 years of life changes, playing with my nieces and nephew I had never met in person. Maybe Derek and I could finally rebuild the relationship that had fractured when we were teenagers competing for Dad's approval. Walking up that driveway, I noticed several suitcases stacked on the porch. My stomach dropped, but I pushed away the suspicious thoughts. Maybe they were decorating boxes or donations for charity. Surely there was a reasonable explanation. Susan answered the door wearing a tropical print dress and sandals, despite the December cold. Her hair was done professionally, makeup applied perfectly. Behind her stood Derek, in board shorts and a tank top, grinning like he had just won the lottery. 3 small children bounced around excitedly, but not because their uncle had arrived. They were pumped about something else entirely. The moment she opened her mouth, I understood everything. There was no family reunion planned, no special Christmas traditions waiting for me. No desperate longing to reconnect with their beloved son and brother. I was unpaid labor, pure and simple. A free babysitter who had just spent his last $800 to provide them with childcare. Derek stepped forward, barely containing his laughter. His wife Amanda emerged from the kitchen, rolling her eyes at me like I was some kind of nuisance. The 3 kids, 7-year-old twins Madison and Blake plus 4-year-old Harper, immediately started climbing on furniture and screaming. No one made any effort to introduce me properly or explain the situation with any kindness. "You should have seen your face," Derek chuckled, pulling out his phone to take pictures of my shocked expression. "We have been planning this Bahamas trip for 6 months. The timing worked out perfectly when Mom convinced you to come home. 5 days of paradise, while you learn what real parenting feels like." Amanda snorted with amusement. "We told the kids they could do whatever they want while you are watching them. Consider it practice for when you eventually grow up and have your own responsibilities." Derek high-fived her as the children began chanting about how they were going to make Uncle Cade miserable. The casual cruelty was breathtaking. These were the people who claimed to love me, to miss me so desperately they could not imagine holidays without me. But they had engineered an elaborate scheme to manipulate me into providing free childcare so they could vacation in luxury. The planning, the emotional manipulation, the months of careful lies, it was all calculated exploitation. Susan grabbed her purse and headed toward the door like this was completely normal. The airport shuttle would arrive any moment, she announced cheerfully. We left emergency numbers on the refrigerator and enough food for a few days. You will figure out the rest. She paused to look back at me with what might have been the tiniest flicker of guilt. This will be good for you, Cade. Maybe you will finally learn some responsibility. That was when I pulled out my phone and smiled. I'd been holding it since walking up the driveway, recording everything from their casual dismissal to Derek's mocking commentary. But more importantly, I had something they did not expect. My recent promotion to lead developer for a tech startup that had just secured $15 million in funding. For 2 years, I had let them believe I was struggling and unsuccessful because their constant criticism was easier to endure than their jealousy. The expression on Susan's face when I revealed the recording was priceless. Pure panic. Derek stopped laughing immediately. Amanda's smug smile vanished because they realized that their casual cruelty had just been documented by someone who was not the family failure they thought they were humiliating. They left anyway. The airport shuttle honked outside, and despite their obvious discomfort about being recorded, the pull of their prepaid vacation proved stronger than any concern about consequences. Susan called over her shoulder that they would discuss my recording when they returned, as if I was a child who would be punished for documenting their abuse. The moment their vehicle disappeared down the street, chaos erupted. Madison and Blake, the 7-year-old twins, immediately began tearing through the house like tiny tornadoes. They dumped toy boxes, scattered books, and started jumping from couch to couch. 4-year-old Harper sat in the middle of the living room screaming at the top of her lungs for no apparent reason. I had never been alone with children before. These 3 had clearly been told they could do whatever they wanted, and they took that instruction seriously. When I asked them to calm down, Madison looked me dead in the eye and said, "Mommy told us you are not allowed to tell us what to do. You are just the babysitter." The refrigerator contained leftover pizza, some moldy fruit, and condiments. No breakfast food, no snacks appropriate for children, no milk or juice. Derek's definition of enough food for a few days apparently meant I would need to figure out meals, grocery shopping, and feeding 3 kids with zero preparation or resources. There were no emergency contacts beyond Derek's cell phone, no pediatrician information, no list of allergies or medical conditions, no schedule for meals naps or bedtime routines. I was completely on my own with 3 children I did not know in a situation I had never consented to. Blake decided to flood the upstairs bathroom by stuffing washcloths into the sink and leaving the water running. By the time I discovered it, water was seeping through the ceiling into the kitchen below. Madison had gotten into Susan's makeup and painted the hallway mirror with lipstick and foundation. Harper continued screaming because she wanted her parents, not some stranger uncle. My phone rang around 6 that evening. Derek's voice was cheerful and relaxed clearly, calling from some poolside bar. Just checking in, he laughed. How are the monsters treating their new favorite uncle? I could hear tropical music and clinking glasses in the background, while I stood in a house that looked like a war zone. When I tried to explain the flooding and destruction, Derek laughed even harder. Kids will be kids, Cade. You signed up for this when you decided to come home. Consider it payback for all the times Mom had to clean up your messes when we were little. He hung up before I could respond. Susan called an hour later, but not to check on her grandchildren. She wanted to complain about Derek being distracted during their romantic dinner because he was worried about whether I could handle basic babysitting. Apparently, my incompetence was ruining their vacation experience. She suggested I figure out how to be more capable so her son could relax and enjoy his well-deserved break. I was scrubbing lipstick off the mirror when I noticed Derek had left his iPad behind. The screen was still logged into the family group chat I had never been added to. Message after message revealed the truth I had suspected, but hoped was not real. This entire scheme had been planned for months, down to the smallest detail. The chat included not just Derek and Susan, but our grandfather Robert, our Aunt Patricia, and our cousin Justin. Everyone knew about the manipulation plan. Grandfather had suggested they tell me it was a family emergency, to guarantee I would come. Patricia had recommended they book the vacation for right after Christmas to maximize guilt if I tried to back out. Justin had literally written, "The idiot will never figure it out until it is too late to do anything about it." Derek's messages were the worst. He had been updating everyone about my financial struggles, sharing details from our rare phone conversations where I mentioned work stress or money worries. They had been laughing about my situation for months, placing bets on whether I would actually be stupid enough to spend money I could not afford on a flight home to provide them with free babysitting. The vacation was not spontaneous. The hotel was booked 6 months ago, the same week Susan started her campaign of emotional manipulation calls. They had calculated exactly how much guilt and false emotion would be required to get me home, then executed their plan with military precision. Everyone in the family except me had known what was really happening. Madison wandered into the kitchen while I was reading, glancing at the iPad screen with casual interest. "Oh, Daddy told us you would be reading his messages eventually," she said matter-of-factly. "He said you were too dumb to figure out when people are tricking you, but you might accidentally discover stuff if we left clues around." The casual cruelty from a 7-year-old was somehow worse than the adult manipulation. These children had been coached to expect their uncle to be an object of ridicule, someone whose feelings did not matter. Derek had prepared them to participate in humiliating me, teaching them that family members were acceptable targets for entertainment. Blake joined his twin sister, both of them studying my face with scientific curiosity. "Are you crying, Uncle Cade?" he asked with genuine interest. "Daddy said you would probably cry when you realized nobody actually wanted you here. He said adults who cry are babies, and babies do not get to make rules." 4-year-old Harper had stopped screaming long enough to pay attention to the conversation. She toddled over and patted my leg with surprising gentleness. "Do not be sad, Uncle Cade," she said sweetly. "Mommy says everyone gets tricked sometimes. Even grown-ups can be dummies." The children were not inherently cruel. They were repeating lessons taught by adults who should have known better. Madison and Blake had been told their uncle was stupid and deserving of mockery. Harper had learned that some family members existed to be used and discarded. These kids were growing up thinking manipulation and exploitation were normal parts of family relationships. I realized then that documenting the audio had been just the beginning. This was a systematic pattern of emotional abuse that had been building for years and probably affected more family members than just me. Derek and Susan had created an environment where cruelty was acceptable entertainment, where targeting vulnerable relatives was a family bonding activity. The house phone rang again near midnight. This time it was Amanda calling from whatever expensive restaurant they were enjoying. Her voice was slurred from alcohol, and she was clearly feeling bold enough to say what she really thought. "I hope those brats are making your life hell," she giggled. "Derek and I planned this whole thing because we knew you would be too much of a pushover to say no. Consider it education about real-life little brother-in-law." She hung up before I could respond, but not before I heard Derek laughing in the background and making some comment about me, probably hiding in the bathroom crying. These people were having the time of their lives, knowing I was struggling alone with their children, while they lived it up in paradise on the money they had saved by manipulating me into free babysitting. Day 2 brought new levels of chaos I had not thought possible. The children had been up past midnight destroying their bedrooms, and Harper had wet the bed twice. Nobody had mentioned she was not fully potty trained yet. Madison and Blake refused to eat anything I prepared, claiming they only ate specific brands and types of food that were not in the house. My phone started ringing before 7 in the morning. Susan called to complain that Derek could not enjoy his breakfast because he was worried about whether I had figured out how to handle basic childcare. She lectured me about being more competent so her son could relax on his hard-earned vacation. The irony of her concern for Derek's stress while completely ignoring mine was lost on her. Derek called an hour later, laughing about photos the kids had sent him of the house's condition. Apparently, Madison had figured out how to use his old phone to document my struggles for their entertainment. The children had been taking videos of me cleaning up their messes, recording my attempts to get them to behave, and sending everything to their parents for mockery. "You should see these videos." Cade Derek chuckled from his beach chair. "Madison got a great shot of you on your hands and knees scrubbing crayon marks off the wall. Amanda thinks we should post them online. You look so pathetic trying to be an authority figure. The kids do not respect you at all, and honestly, why should they?" Amanda grabbed the phone to add her own commentary. "We told them you are not their real uncle, just some random guy mom found to babysit for free," she giggled. "They know they do not have to listen to anything you say. We gave them permission to treat you however they want. Consider it payment for being such a disappointment to the family all these years." The systematic cruelty was breathtaking. They had not just manipulated me into babysitting. They had actively undermined any possibility of my success. The children had been coached to disrespect me, taught that I deserved whatever mistreatment they could dish out, and given explicit permission to make my life miserable for their parents' entertainment. Things got worse when Blake fell off the couch during one of their jumping games and gashed his forehead on the coffee table corner. Blood everywhere. A screaming child and me with no idea whether he needed stitches or just bandages. I called Derek immediately, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Susan's phone did the same. They had turned off their devices to avoid being bothered during their tropical paradise experience. The nearest emergency room was 20 minutes away. Blake was crying. Madison was screaming about her brother being hurt, and Harper was having a meltdown about all the blood. I had no car seats, no insurance information, no legal authority to make medical decisions for any of them. But leaving a bleeding child untreated was not an option. The hospital staff looked at me suspiciously when I arrived with 3 children I could not prove were my responsibility. A social worker was called to verify my identity and relationship to the kids. I had to explain the entire babysitting situation while Blake got 6 stitches in his forehead and the girls sat in plastic chairs, looking traumatized. When Derek finally called me back 4 hours later, his first words were not concern for his son. Instead, he screamed about how I had let Blake get hurt on my watch. This was exactly why he had not wanted to leave his kids with someone incompetent. He raged. Now his vacation was ruined because he had to worry about his children being unsafe with an irresponsible babysitter. The blame shifting was incredible. Derek had created the dangerous situation by leaving his children with someone who had no experience, no preparation, and no authority. But somehow his son's injury was my fault for not preventing an accident that could have happened to any parent at any time. I was being held responsible for consequences of his own reckless choices. Susan called 30 minutes later to pile on additional guilt. She had been looking forward to this vacation for months. She sobbed dramatically. Now Derek was too upset to enjoy any of their planned activities because I had proven myself incapable of keeping children safe. Her tears were for her ruined vacation, not for her grandson's injury or my impossible situation. Extended family members started calling throughout the evening to add their criticism. Grandfather Robert lectured me about responsibility and competence, as if I had volunteered for this babysitting duty instead of being manipulated into it. Aunt Patricia suggested I was probably too immature to handle children properly, conveniently forgetting that Derek had given me zero preparation or resources. Cousin Justin called to share his opinion that I had always been the family screw-up, and this incident proved nothing had changed. He reminded me of childhood mistakes and adolescent failures, building a case that Blake's accident was just the latest example of my fundamental inadequacy as a human being. The pile-on felt coordinated, like they had discussed how to maximize my guilt and shame. But something interesting happened while I sat in that hospital waiting room. A nurse recognized my name from a recent article in Tech Innovators magazine about rising stars in artificial intelligence development. She mentioned seeing my photo in the feature about young entrepreneurs who were revolutionizing software security for government contracts. My professional success had been documented in national media for months. Articles about our startup's breakthrough encryption technology, interviews about my role leading development teams, even a mention in Forbes about companies to watch in the cybersecurity space. Anyone who cared enough to Google my name would have found extensive coverage of my achievements. My family could have known about my success at any time. They chose ignorance because it was more convenient for their narrative about me being a failure. Acknowledging my accomplishments would have made their exploitation more difficult to justify. It was easier to mock someone they believed was unsuccessful than to admit they were mistreating a family member who had achieved more than any of them. The contrast was stark. Complete strangers in the medical field recognized my professional reputation and treated me with respect. Meanwhile, my own family had spent months planning ways to humiliate and exploit me, based on assumptions they had never bothered to verify. Their willful ignorance was a choice, not an accident. Day 3 brought a phone call that shattered whatever remained of my patience. Susan's voice was bright and cheerful as she explained her latest demand. Derek had forgotten his lucky golf shirt at his apartment across town, and she needed me to drive 2 hours round trip to retrieve it before their planned tournament that afternoon. Apparently, his vacation would be completely ruined without this specific piece of clothing. The apartment was Derek's old place, from before his divorce, now sitting empty while he figured out his next living arrangement. Susan had the key, but she was 2,000 miles away sipping cocktails on a beach. Somehow this had become my emergency to solve, despite having 3 small children to supervise and no babysitter to watch them during a 4-hour absence. When I pointed out the logistical impossibility, Susan's tone turned sharp and accusatory. Derek had specifically mentioned wanting that shirt, she snapped. If I truly cared about family, I would find a way to make it happen. Her son deserved to enjoy every moment of his well-earned vacation, and my selfishness was threatening his happiness. She hung up before I could explain why loading 3 young children into a car for a 4-hour round trip was irresponsible. Madison and Blake had been listening to the conversation with interest. They immediately started chanting about the car ride they had been promised, demanding I take them on an adventure to Daddy's old apartment. When I explained we were not going anywhere, both twins threw spectacular tantrums that lasted over an hour. Harper joined the chaos by refusing her afternoon nap and screaming whenever I tried to calm her down. The noise level was unbearable. Neighbors started looking over the fence with concerned expressions. Mrs. Patterson from next door knocked on the front door to ask if everything was okay, clearly worried about the children's welfare. That was when I discovered something that changed everything. Madison had been playing with Derek's iPad again, accidentally opening a video file that was not meant for my eyes. It showed Derek and Amanda in their hotel room, laughing hysterically. While watching the videos, the children had been secretly recording of my struggles. The footage was edited into a compilation, with mocking commentary added over scenes of me cleaning messes, trying to discipline the kids, and dealing with various disasters. Derek had titled it Uncle Cade's Epic Babysitting Fail and shared it in the family group chat for everyone's entertainment. Grandfather Robert, Aunt Patricia, and Cousin Justin had all responded with crying, laughing emojis and additional cruel commentary. But there was more. Derek was actively coaching the children during their video calls, giving them suggestions for new ways to make my life difficult. He told Madison to hide all the paper towels so I would struggle to clean up spills. He instructed Blake to break things accidentally on purpose. He encouraged Harper to have meltdowns whenever I tried to establish any kind of routine or order. The systematic nature of the sabotage was stunning. Every frustration, every impossible situation, every moment of chaos had been deliberately engineered by adults who found my suffering entertaining. These were not normal childhood behavior problems. These were calculated attacks orchestrated by parents who were teaching their children that cruelty was acceptable entertainment. Amanda appeared in one video segment suggesting they should post the compilation on social media to humiliate me publicly. She thought it would be hilarious to let everyone from high school see how pathetic I had become. Derek agreed enthusiastically, saying it would teach me not to think I was better than the rest of the family just because I lived in a different state. The final video showed Derek coaching Madison to repeat specific phrases designed to hurt my feelings. He taught her to say that nobody in the family actually wanted me around, that I was only useful for babysitting, and that everyone would be happier when I went back to Seattle and left them alone. A 7-year-old was being trained to deliver psychological attacks, scripted by her father. I watched Derek and Amanda rolling with laughter as they planned additional humiliations for my remaining days. They discussed having the children refuse to eat anything I cooked, staging fake emergencies to stress me out, and recording my reactions to various pranks and setbacks. My pain was their entertainment, and they were actively working to maximize my suffering. The cruelest part was hearing Madison repeat something Derek had obviously told her many times. She looked directly into the camera and said, "Uncle Cade will never amount to anything because he is too stupid to see when people are using him. Daddy says some people are born to be losers, and Uncle Cade is one of them." A 7-year-old child had internalized the message that some family members deserved mistreatment. She was learning that it was acceptable to target vulnerable relatives for entertainment. Derek was actively teaching the next generation that empathy and kindness were unnecessary when dealing with people they considered inferior. That evening brought another conference call with the entire family. Everyone was gathered around Derek's phone on speakerphone alcohol, making them bolder than usual. They took turns sharing their favorite moments from the video compilation, laughing about my various struggles and failures as a babysitter. Susan giggled about me looking overwhelmed during Harper's tantrums. Derek shared his delight at my panic when Blake got injured. Amanda described my pathetic attempts to establish authority with children who had been told not to respect me. Each family member added their own cruel commentary about my inadequacy and incompetence. But I was recording everything. Every laugh at my expense, every mocking comment, every casual admission of their calculated cruelty was being documented. And I had something they did not know about yet. My work with federal law enforcement contracts meant I was familiar with legal definitions of harassment, emotional abuse, and financial exploitation. I waited for a pause in their laughter before speaking calmly into the phone. "I want everyone to know I have been recording these conversations," I said quietly, "and I am a witness protection coordinator for the FBI." The silence was immediate and absolute. Nobody laughed. Nobody spoke. The line went completely dead except for the sound of waves in the background and Derek suddenly panicked breathing. Because they realized that their months of documented cruelty might have serious consequences they had never considered. The callback started within minutes. Susan's voice was shaking as she demanded to know what I really did for work and whether I was serious about recording their conversations. The confidence and cruelty had vanished, replaced by barely controlled panic. She kept asking whether I was joking, whether this was some kind of revenge prank, whether I understood how her words might have sounded out of context. Derek called separately, his voice tight with fear. He tried to minimize the recorded conversations as harmless family teasing that I was taking too seriously. Everyone says things they do not mean when they are relaxed on vacation, he argued desperately. Surely I understood the difference between joking around and actual malicious intent. He begged me to delete the recordings and pretend this conversation had never happened. The truth about my work was actually more complicated than I had let them believe. My tech startup did contract with federal agencies for secure communication systems, and I did hold security clearance that required extensive background checks. But the Witness Protection Coordinator title was a specific role I had been offered, but not yet accepted pending resolution of my current project deadlines. Still, the family did not know those details. All they knew was that someone with federal connections had documented months of their calculated emotional abuse and financial manipulation. The recordings captured explicit admissions of conspiracy to defraud, evidence of ongoing tax fraud through false dependency claims, and clear patterns of harassment designed to cause emotional distress. Amanda called next her tropical vacation buzz completely evaporated. She tried a different approach, claiming their harsh words came from a place of family love and concern about my life choices. They only wanted to motivate me to reach my full potential, she insisted. Everything they had done was meant to help me grow as a person, not to cause genuine harm. The revisionist history was breathtaking. Suddenly, months of calculated cruelty became tough love. The elaborate manipulation scheme became family intervention. The videos mocking my struggles became documentation of areas where I needed improvement. They were rewriting reality in real time, hoping I would accept their new narrative and abandon any thoughts of consequences. Grandfather Robert called from his retirement community, his voice carrying the authority he had wielded over the family for decades. He tried to invoke family loyalty and tradition, reminding me of all the times the family had supported me through difficult periods. Surely I would not repay their kindness by creating legal problems over a simple misunderstanding between relatives. But I had never received the family support he claimed to remember. During college, I had worked multiple jobs and taken loans to pay for everything, while Derek received full parental funding for his education. After Dad's death, I had been excluded from inheritance decisions and family financial planning. Their support had been conditional, minimal, and always came with strings attached that benefited them more than me. Aunt Patricia attempted emotional manipulation, crying about how much the family loved me, despite my tendency to misinterpret their intentions. She painted me as overly sensitive and prone to taking innocent comments too seriously. Everyone had always known I was different, she sobbed, but that did not mean they loved me any less. This was just a communication problem that could be resolved with better understanding on my part. The children had stopped their destructive behavior and were watching me with newfound interest. Madison approached me cautiously while I was on the phone with Patricia, studying my face with scientific curiosity. "Are you really an FBI person, Uncle Cade?" she whispered. Blake and Harper gathered around, suddenly treating me with the respect their parents had never taught them to show. I explained that I worked with computers to keep important information safe, which sometimes involved helping police and government agencies. The children were fascinated by this revelation, asking questions about my work that showed more genuine interest than any adult family member had ever expressed. They wanted to know about the cases I worked on, the technology I developed, the importance of cybersecurity in modern life. For the first time since arriving, I saw these children as individuals rather than instruments of their parents' cruelty. Madison was clearly intelligent and curious about technology. Blake showed artistic interests when he was not being coached to cause chaos. Harper had a sweet personality when she was not being encouraged to have tantrums for adult entertainment. Derek's second call that evening was pure desperation. He tried to offer bribes, promising better treatment in the future if I would just forget about the recordings. The family could start fresh, he suggested, with everyone treating me with the respect I deserved. They had learned their lesson about taking me for granted, and things would be completely different from now on. But bribes required trust and trust had been permanently shattered by months of calculated deception. Derek had shown me exactly who he was when he thought there would be no consequences. His promises of future better behavior were meaningless without accountability for past actions. Susan called again near midnight, her voice slurred from whatever she had been drinking to cope with her panic. She tried threats warning me that creating family drama would only hurt everyone involved, including the children who needed stability and love. Did I really want to traumatize Madison, Blake, and Harper by destroying their family structure over some misunderstood adult conversations? The projection was incredible. Susan was claiming concern for children she had abandoned for a vacation while coaching them to psychologically abuse their uncle. She was warning about family trauma while actively creating it through systematic emotional manipulation. Her threats about protecting the children rang hollow from someone who had turned them into weapons against a family member. But I had leverage they were only beginning to understand. My security clearance required reporting any potential financial crimes that came to my attention. Derek's tax fraud involving false dependency claims was not just family drama, it was federal crime that I had legal obligation to document. Their scheme had accidentally entangled them with someone who had professional responsibility to report their illegal activities. The final call of the evening came from cousin Justin, who had been elected to try one last approach. He attempted to appeal to my supposed desire for family acceptance and belonging. Everyone made mistakes, he argued reasonably. The family was willing to work through this situation if I was mature enough to forgive and forget. But forgiveness required acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and none of them had actually apologized for anything. They were panicking about consequences, not feeling remorse for their actions. Their concern was self-preservation, not genuine recognition of the harm they had caused. Real change would require accountability they were not yet ready to accept. They came back early. The tropical paradise vacation was abandoned on day 4 when panic overcame their desire for relaxation. Derek and Amanda flew home that evening, arriving disheveled and exhausted from their rushed travel arrangements. Susan followed on a red-eye flight, her carefully planned itinerary scrapped in favor of damage control. The children were asleep when Derek's key turned in the front door. He crept into the house like a burglar, clearly hoping to avoid immediate confrontation. But I was waiting in the living room with his iPad, my laptop, and printed copies of everything I had discovered during their absence. The evidence was organized, documented, and ready for discussion. Derek looked terrible. His vacation tan could not hide the stress lines around his eyes or the way his hands shook when he saw the paperwork spread across the coffee table. He tried to maintain casual confidence, asking how the kids had behaved and whether we could talk privately about our earlier misunderstanding. His voice carried false brightness that fooled no one. Amanda appeared behind him, her tropical wardrobe looking ridiculous in the Pennsylvania winter cold. She started to make some sarcastic comment about me still being there, but Derek silenced her with a sharp gesture. They both recognized that the power dynamic had shifted dramatically since their departure. I was no longer the family victim they could exploit with impunity. Susan arrived 2 hours later, her makeup smeared and her hair disheveled from crying during the flight home. She had been drinking, probably heavily, and struggled to maintain her balance while walking through the front door. Her first words were a slurred demand to know what I planned to do with the recorded conversations. The family gathering that followed was unlike any meeting we had ever held. Instead of their usual pattern of ganging up on me with criticism and demands, everyone sat quietly while I laid out the evidence of their systematic manipulation. Each family member's participation in the scheme was documented with screenshots, audio recordings, and timeline evidence. Derek's financial crimes were the most serious. Using my social security number for credit applications, claiming me as a dependent on tax returns, while providing zero support, and several other fraudulent activities that constituted federal offenses. The evidence was clear, documented, and recent enough to trigger audits that would uncover additional illegal activities. Susan's gambling debts explained her desperate need for the vacation money they had saved through my free babysitting. Bank statements I had found showed thousands of dollars in casino charges and online poker losses. Her emotional manipulation calls had been motivated by financial pressure she had hidden from the rest of the family, including Derek. Amanda's social media posts revealed additional lies about their family financial situation. She had been portraying a lifestyle they could not afford, racking up credit card debt for designer clothes and expensive dinners, while Derek struggled with child support payments and legal fees from his divorce. Their financial stress made them view me as a resource to be exploited, rather than a family member deserving respect. The confrontation escalated when Derek attempted to physically intimidate me, standing up suddenly and moving toward me with clenched fists. His anger at being exposed overrode whatever intelligence he normally possessed. But neighbors had been watching the house since my arrival, concerned about the children's welfare and the obvious family drama playing out behind closed doors. Mrs. Patterson called police when she heard shouting through the windows. 2 officers arrived within minutes, creating additional witnesses to Derek's threatening behavior and the family's general dysfunction. The police report would become part of the permanent record documenting this incident, adding official weight to my other evidence. Extended family members began arriving throughout the evening as word spread about the emergency. Grandfather Robert came first, his usual authoritative demeanor replaced by obvious worry about legal consequences for tax fraud he had helped plan. Aunt Patricia followed, bringing cousin Justin and his wife Sarah, who had participated in the group chat mockery. Each new arrival meant another person who had to confront evidence of their participation in systematic emotional abuse. The group chat messages were particularly damaging because they showed premeditation coordination and shared enjoyment of my suffering. This was not accidental harm or misunderstood communication. It was deliberate cruelty planned and executed by multiple family members over several months. The children woke up during the commotion and witnessed adults they had always seen as powerful figures, now crying, arguing, and begging. Madison asked me quietly whether everyone was in trouble because of the videos they had helped make. The sophistication of her question showed how much she had understood about her parents' manipulation tactics. Blake wanted to know if he would get in trouble for breaking things on purpose, like Daddy had told him to do. Harper asked whether Mommy and Daddy were going to jail like bad people on television shows. These children were processing the collapse of their entire understanding of family relationships and adult authority. The most devastating moment came when I revealed my ultimate leverage. My company had just been selected for a major government contract designing security systems for federal facilities. Any family member with documented fraudulent activity would trigger security reviews that could affect my clearance level, giving me legal obligation to report their crimes regardless of family relationships. Derek's face went completely white when he understood the implications. His tax fraud was not just a family secret that could be swept under the rug. It was documented criminal activity that I had professional responsibility to report if I wanted to maintain my security clearance and continue my career. The scheme he had designed to exploit me had accidentally created a situation where he had no leverage, and I held all the power. Susan collapsed into a chair, sobbing about how she had never meant for things to go this far. Amanda started making frantic phone calls to find lawyers who could advise them about damage control. Grandfather Robert sat in stunned silence as he calculated the financial and legal consequences of their coordinated fraud scheme. The family members who had seemed so confident and powerful just days earlier were now facing the possibility of serious legal consequences for treating me as an acceptable target for exploitation and abuse. Their casual cruelty had been documented by someone with both the ability and the professional obligation to ensure accountability. The transformation was immediate and complete. Within 24 hours of my revelation about the government contract and security clearance requirements, Every family member had contacted me with formal apologies and offers to make amends. The desperate panic in their voices made it clear they finally understood the seriousness of their situation. Derek called first, his voice shaky and subdued as he acknowledged the extent of his wrongdoing. He admitted to years of financial fraud involving my personal information, agreed to immediately correct all false tax filings, and promised to cease any future illegal activities. His apology included specific details about each fraudulent action, showing he understood exactly what crimes he had committed. More importantly, Derek began the process of undoing the psychological damage he had inflicted on his children. He sat down with Madison Blake and Harper to explain that their behavior toward me had been wrong and that he had taught them inappropriate lessons about family relationships. The children were confused, but relieved to learn that treating people with kindness was actually the correct way to behave. Susan's apology was the most difficult to hear because it included admissions about her gambling addiction and the financial desperation that had motivated her elaborate manipulation scheme. She had been borrowing money from Derek to cover casino losses, creating pressure that made my free babysitting seem like a financial necessity rather than family exploitation. She agreed to enter therapy for gambling addiction and attend family counseling to address the emotional manipulation patterns that had damaged our relationship for years. Susan also committed to making financial restitution for my flight costs, lost wages, and the emotional distress caused by her systematic deception. The accountability was comprehensive and legally binding. Amanda's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic because she had been the most openly cruel during their vacation calls. Her public apology included admissions about coaching the children to disrespect me and her role in creating the mocking video compilation. She deleted all social media posts portraying their false lifestyle and committed to honest representation of their family situation. Extended family members followed similar patterns of acknowledgement and restitution. Grandfather Robert admitted his role in planning the manipulation scheme and agreed to modify his will to include provisions ensuring equal treatment for all grandchildren. Aunt Patricia and Cousin Justin both apologized for their participation in the group chat mockery and committed to respectful communication in all future family interactions. The financial restitution was substantial but fair. Derek paid for my flight home, reimbursed my lost wages from taking unpaid time off work, and provided additional compensation for emotional damages. The family collectively contributed to a fund that would cover therapy costs for the children who had been traumatized by witnessing and participating in systematic emotional abuse. But the most meaningful changes were relational rather than financial. Derek began treating his children with the respect and kindness he should have shown all along, teaching them healthy communication skills and emotional intelligence. The kids responded quickly to consistent loving guidance and began showing me genuine affection rather than coached hostility. Susan started attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings and working with a financial counselor to address her debt problems. Her therapy sessions included specific focus on the emotional manipulation tactics she had used against family members for years. The accountability process was difficult but necessary for genuine healing. The children were the real winners in this transformation. Madison Blake and Harper began receiving the stable, loving parenting they deserved, instead of being used as weapons in adult conflicts. They learned about empathy, respect, and healthy family relationships through watching the adults in their lives take responsibility for past mistakes. Madison became fascinated with my technology work and started asking thoughtful questions about computer security and software development. Blake discovered his artistic talents when he was no longer being coached to break things for adult entertainment. Harper blossomed into the sweet, intelligent child she had always been underneath the tantrums her parents had encouraged. The family established new communication patterns based on honesty, respect, and genuine care for each member's well-being. Holiday visits became optional rather than obligatory, removing the pressure that had made family gatherings feel like emotional minefields. Everyone could participate in family activities without fear of manipulation or exploitation. Derek and I rebuilt our brotherhood on a foundation of mutual respect rather than childhood competition and parental favoritism. He began seeking my advice about parenting challenges and career decisions, treating me as an equal rather than a target for ridicule. Our relationship became healthier than it had ever been during our youth. The government contract proceeded without complications because all family members had taken responsibility for their past actions and committed to lawful behavior going forward. My security clearance was maintained, and my career continued its upward trajectory without the shadow of family legal problems. Most importantly, the children learned that family love should never involve accepting mistreatment or exploitation. They witnessed adults taking responsibility for mistakes and working to repair damage caused by poor choices. These lessons about accountability and respect would serve them well in their own future relationships. The experience taught our entire family that healthy relationships require boundaries, honesty, and mutual respect. Love is not proven by accepting abuse or manipulation. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hold people accountable when their behavior causes harm, because that creates opportunities for genuine growth and healing. Looking back, I realized that standing up for myself did not destroy our family. It actually saved us from continuing destructive patterns that were teaching the next generation that exploitation and cruelty were acceptable forms of family interaction. Sometimes families need crisis to create the motivation for positive change. I learned that family love is not proven by accepting mistreatment. Real love means holding people accountable when they hurt you, because that is how relationships become healthy. Sometimes the people who claim to love you most are the ones who need the strongest boundaries, not because you want to punish them, but because you want to give them the opportunity to become better versions of themselves. The holidays that year became genuinely joyful for the first time in decades. We gathered as a family that had chosen honesty, respect, and genuine care over manipulation, exploitation, and casual cruelty. The children experienced the security of consistent, loving adults who treated each other with kindness. And I learned that sometimes fighting back is the most loving thing you can do, not just for yourself, but for everyone involved. Have you ever had to set firm boundaries with family members who were taking advantage of your kindness? Sometimes the people closest to us test our limits the most. Thinking family relationships mean they can get away with behavior they would never try with friends or colleagues. I would love to hear your thoughts about finding the balance between family loyalty and self-respect in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like to help others find it. Subscribe to hear more stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary family challenges and finding the courage to stand up for themselves. And share this with anyone who might need encouragement to set their own healthy boundaries. Thank you for listening to this journey of family transformation and the power of accountability. Remember that real love sometimes requires difficult conversations, but the relationships that survive those challenges become stronger and more authentic than ever before. Wishing you all the courage to demand the respect you deserve from everyone in your life, especially those who claim to love you most.